Hi, nice to see everybody here today. It's a great honor for me to be here today, and I would like to acknowledge the organization that has been done to bring us all here for such an important gathering. We are Métis. Yes. You are a survivor in more ways than one. And I know firsthand the courage that it takes to be here today. So I encourage you to walk this journey with me today of truth-seeking and validation. Did you grow up thinking, who am I? Have you grown up thinking, why me? When you were growing up, did you ask yourself, what is this purpose? If you did grow up with these questions, you're perfectly normal. And sometimes, for an adoptee, the words adoption, foster care, lost, sad, trust, probably played a key role in your progress towards adulthood. Although it's true that everyone's childhood experience is different, adoptees who grow up in a neglectful environment strive to develop a healthy sense of self-worth. Although many are intelligent, sometimes we don't live up to our potential, only because we weren't loved and embraced as children. That was the story of me at one time. Regardless of what your experience was or what your dreams are, you have to constantly ask yourself, how can I understand my purpose when I don't understand my beginnings? I've heard so many adoptees say the only story of their beginnings they know is what other people tell them. In fact, I never knew my beginnings until I was reunited with my mother. I was 25 years old. I decided to change the meaning of the word adoption to adopt success in finding my true life-seeking journey so I could get off the roller coaster, find a purpose, and have meaningful relationships. And as an adoptee, our journey to find our clear purpose is more challenging. No matter how good or damaging your experience was as an adoptee, I am here to tell you that there are tools to help you access and validate your life's beginnings. Regardless of the reasons you were put into care, perhaps your parents' childhood was also a victim of the system. For an example, a residential school survivor. And so the cycle of lost identity, family, and parenting skills is sometimes done with non-confidence because of the long-term effects of a dysfunctional childhood and displacement. Unfortunately, many adoptees share a common thread of deep pain. I now share with you my journey of truth-seeking my life as an adoptee. I was separated from my mother at the age of 3 years old. I and my sister remained permanent wards of the Superintendent of Child Welfare until I was almost 10 years old. I lived in 2 separate foster homes and eventually was adopted to the second foster home. Because of the dysfunction and abuse, I went out into the world in my early teens with only a grade 8 education. I sofa surfed, and I also slept in apartment stairwells in my first year on my own. My childhood experiences followed me in my life journey, and I always had that fire within me to seek my story and find my family. I also understood that when my identity was completely changed at the age of 7, it would make it challenging for my natural mother to find me. And so my journey begins. With information given from the first foster family, my sister obtained her biological father's name and searched for him through the telephone directory. She wrote a letter to all she felt was a possible candidate. We knew if we could find my sister's biological father, we could perhaps get some information about our biological mother, because he did marry our mother. A response came back within weeks. It was her biological father. Upon her reconnection with her biological father, my sister spent a week or so with him at the age of 13 years old. This proved to be frustrating, and all the blame for our family breakdown was his main goal, to discredit our biological mother. Unknown to us at that time, what we would later learn from what my child welfare files would reveal about the circumstances of our family breakdown. However, he did give my sister, our mother's, full legal name. So on January 22nd, 1987, my sister and I furthered our truth-seeking journey. Both of us young mothers ourselves, and in our late teens and early 20s, we continued our search for our natural mother's name in newspaper archives and looked for phone listings through the phone directories by cold calling possible leads from British Columbia to Toronto. It worked to find my sister's father. Why not our mother? One suitable phone listing we contacted seemed to fit our mother's initials. After the recipient to my sister's call, she listened to my sister's reason for the call and stated, "We are not related in any way." Unknown to me, my sister further wrote this person a letter in disbelief. So on February 3rd, 1987, a response to my sister's letter of January 22nd, 1987, I'll quote just a small paragraph of the response written by the recipient. And I quote, "I only outline my history in brief to convince you we are not related. I'm returning your letters and your pictures, since you no doubt will want to utilize them in your search. It seems that it's hard for you to accept that during our phone conversation, your letter shows that you still haven't accepted what I said." Now, that's determination. Yet so innocent and so understandable. Being determined, we pursued again July 9th, 1990. My sister and I registered on the active registry for adoptees and their parents in British Columbia in anticipation of a matching application from our biological mother. We did this through the administration of the Adoption Reunion Registry of British Columbia. On May 2nd, 1992, early afternoon, I had just popped into my sister's for a quick visit. Her phone rang, and I answered it. The caller asked for my sister, and I replied, "She's busy." And so, "Can I take a message?" The caller soon sounded so official. I said, "Here she is." So I hand the phone over to my sister. I must have listened to, oh my God, at least 5 times. And things are going through my head. Like, "Did you win the lottery? Let me know what's going on here." And finally, my sister handed the phone to me after she replied to the caller that yes, Shelley is standing right here. My name at birth was Shelley Ann Bush. She was the one that answered the phone. My sister cried out, "It's our mother. They found our mother." Now I'm saying, "Oh my God." And I take the phone. The kind lady on the phone said, "We have matched your sister's application with your mother." And she further explained she had just been speaking with our mother on the other line. "Your mother would like to call you. Is that all right?" I replied, "Yes." The caller proceeded to inform us that we needed to fax our signatures, giving consent for them to relay our information to our natural mother, to enable her to contact us. We had the lady from the Adoption Reunion Registry office promise us that she would relay a message to our mother from us to please call us in an hour. We are now shocked and elated, all at the same time, chatting all the way to the post office to send out a fax with our consent to the Adoption Reunion Registry. As we dash back to my sister's place, with not much time left before that phone would ring, we were so busy getting to the post office and talking a mile a minute between us, with so many questions we had, like, where does she live? Do we have other siblings? Wonder if she knows we have different names. She'll be surprised to learn she has grandchildren. Wonder what she looks like. And all those questions. And so we're back to my sister's house and the phone rings. My sister and I now stood in the kitchen looking at that phone ringing because we hadn't discussed who was going to pick up that phone call. So I picked up the call with my sister standing right beside me, leaning into the phone the best as she could. The voice on the other end said, "Hello. I'm not sure who I'm speaking with. Is this Shelley or is this Sherry?" Our given names, the names she gave us. I said, "It's Shelley. And Sherry is standing right here." I further went on to say they changed our names when we were placed in the second foster home. And I told her our current names. The call was so emotional, with all three of us with lumps in our throats, words that just would not come out. It was awkward and yet so exciting. We shared with her that we had children. She's a grandma. And our mother shared with us that we had 2 other siblings. As slow and overwhelming as that call was, how and where do you start? My mother asked if she could come and visit the following week. And both my sister and I accepted and agreed that this conversation would be best in person. I ended the call with, "How are we going to find you at the airport?" And she answered back, "I'll be the one wearing a red shirt." The week leading up to our mother's arrival was sleepless. Our conversations were full of what-ifs, and our thoughts were questioning, where would we fit into her family, and what if this visit goes bad? The night before, we both worked evening shifts. We agreed to meet at my sister's to prepare a lasagna dinner for our first family dinner with our mother. I think we might have gotten about 4 hours sleep that night. The day has come. It's May 9th, 1992. I'm now 25 years old. My little sister is now 23 years old. Our long-awaited search is over, and we're going to see our mother soon. And it was Mother's Day weekend. Morning came with a checklist of things to do, last-minute preparations, and of course, changing our outfits a million times until we had the right look. Next, we were off to go grab some flowers so that we could meet our mother with a bouquet of flowers. It's now time to head to the airport. We chatted all the way with nervous minds and still in disbelief that this search is over. When we arrived at the airport, we saw a news van, but thought nothing of it as we entered the airport. We waited in much anticipation for our mother's plane to arrive, and our eyes glued to each person coming off that flight, looking for that red shirt. At last, there she was. And as we moved towards her to give her the flowers and to give her a much-awaited hug, we were swarmed with news cameras, and they were looking for our story. I, at that time, didn't know how they found out, but it later came to light that our adoptive parents had made that call. I was not happy. I was not pleased. When I found this out, and we gave them a little bit of a story, we let them take our pictures, we let them run with it. It was Mother's Day weekend, and got out of that airport as quick as we could. Upon our initial reunion, with the media flashing in our moment of greetings and introductions, our mother quietly whispered in my ear, who's who? Is this Shelley or is this Sherry? And we just embraced what we could and left. The first evening, we ate a great dinner and we watched a video that my mother had taped. And it was greetings and introduction of the two siblings that we were not raised with, of my mother's second marriage. The next day, we introduced our children to her. As adoptees, we were always expected to say great to whatever the question or situation was. So we diverted with no serious talks, and we found activities to do to help avoid any serious conversations. The relentless drive to mask our expressions of our true underlying feelings and truth was almost too much. We enjoyed our reunion of being together again and starting new memories to treasure and to keep. With 2 days left of our visit, we opted to stay in that evening, and we had that soul and validation talk, that one I was so trying to avoid. So we had that big talk and lots of tears. My mother presented to us copies of the many, many letters that she had been writing to the Ministry of the Department of Social Welfare, advising them of her capable position and could she have her girls back. So my plan to hold back my emotions was now down the toilet. There are times in our lives where sad things and truth need to be addressed, and we are forced to deal with them. This was my time, against my numbing emotions. I stopped holding back my painful experiences, and I let some of it go. The next morning, I woke up at my sister's with puffy eyes from the big cry the night before, and I crept down the hallway to go to the bathroom. I saw my mother's door was open, and my sister cuddled beside her. My heart was so full of love at that moment. This now was the end of the calm. Now came the storm. We soon struggled with our unprepared part of this journey for all three of us. We did not have the tools for tricky dynamics. I was curious about my beginnings when we lived at my great-grandmother Boucher's house in Toronto, Ontario, where I was born. And so my mother told me my beginnings. It was another piece of my story that I so longed for. When we were separated from our mother, I was just 3 years old. My sister was about 5 months old. The memories we each had with our mothers spent was inequivalent because of the age factor. We did not have any supporting family coaching to help us learn what we needed from each other, and it left things strained. None of us had the skills to deal with this situation, and now we're loaded with triggers, and it was a tricky to navigate. Soon it did transpire into a calming early afternoon, or so we thought. Now I was starting to feel anxiety, because tomorrow I'd be saying goodbye again to my mother. And it triggered my last memory as a young three-year-old saying goodbye. I did not want her to leave. And I know all that had happened without knowing all that had happened. I'd given her a little bit, but not all of it. I remember almost going into panic mode, and I needed to be heard. I asked my mother to stand beside me and hold my hand while I called the adopted family. And I let my feelings go. My sister stood in the kitchen looking in on this while I completely unloaded all the pain. When I finished the call to my adopted family, we sat in the living room, and my mother assured us she would always be in our lives, no matter what. She also stated that she knew things weren't right, as she was expecting to see 2 well-educated girls. This too was hard for her to walk into. The last night we had with our mother during this reunion visit was challenging for all 3 of us. That trust issue was now straight and center, along with separation and anxiety. None of us realized how complicated this journey would now become. The reality was, where do we go from here? My sister and I kept in touch with our mother by phone. However, I was so curious about my biological family and my beginnings. I was sent a plane ticket from my mother, and I went to Ontario to continue seeking my journey and my truth. That was about 2 months after I was reunited with my mom. So off I went to the unknown. I arrived at the Ottawa airport with much anticipation of what I would learn. I had agreed to wait at the baggage carousel for my mother to pick me up while waiting for my overpacked suitcase to arrive on that carousel. I looked up and I saw a girl who looked to be in her late teens across the baggage carousel looking at me. We exchanged glances and we would look away, just to have our eyes meet again. Finally, I said, "Kim?" She replied, "Yes." And I went towards my other sister that I had never met. And we exchanged hugs. Within seconds, my mother and her husband joined us. The ride from Ottawa to Canada, it was awkward, uncomfortable, but yet so exciting. And so the next chapter begins. More family dynamics. I was able to learn from my new siblings that they spent a lot of time in Connecticut with their father's sister in their very, very young ages. Because my mother was hospitalized for periods of time. My mother had tried to commit suicide many times because of her separation from her first two children, me and my sister. I also learned from my new siblings that every year on our birthdays, my mother would spend most of her time in her bedroom for periods of time crying. They would soon learn that those same 2 days would come every year, would always cause my mother such pain. My mother promised them one day they would meet us and we would be found. I was able to bond with my new sister. We shared stories. We spent quality time. I also got to know my brother, too. I was now ready to go to Toronto and meet my grandparents. And my truth-seeking journey continues. My mother and I were off to Toronto. We arrived at my granddad's house. He greeted me with a huge hug and a comment to how much I looked like my mother. I soon met other members of my family. My mother showed me the hospital where I was born, and she continued to show me my roots. And more pieces of my story filled my spirit. Again, we did not have the tools to help us navigate all the emotions. I enjoyed meeting so many members of my family and getting to know my family, but we did not have the tools to help us navigate through this. I continued my personal journey, and I went back out to the West. And soon after, I began riding a roller coaster of ups and downs. Although I was grateful that my siblings had the love and the support of two loving parents, I soon began comparing my life to theirs and my foster family's own children and their successes, and inevitably making me envious and feeling of hopelessness. Soon after, my sister went to Ontario to seek her truth-seeking journey. Shortly after that, my sister went back to school and obtained a degree. She still suffered emotionally relating to her adoptee experiences, and I continued to live in survival mode. My mother continued to visit. We went on vacations. She helped us financially when she could. We always had a great time, and our connection seemed to be growing with each visit. Yet I could not get off this roller coaster to gather my life together and make better plans. My sister and I continued our relationship with our mother sporadically over several years. I and my children flew back east to visit my biological family because I wanted my children to be very part of this journey. However, when life would take a turn for the worse, that roller coaster ride would set in, and I would revert back to the mixed emotions, and so the cycle continues with, I am nobody's girl. That was my line. I would say that to myself constantly. And I did not realize how powerful those words were and how they shaped my life's choices. I somehow needed more validation to my beginnings. It is now 1997, and I needed off that roller coaster. I was once again experiencing turmoil. I relied on my children's father to care for our children while I went on a personal journey. I went camping for quite some time, and I did a lot of inner healing, and shall we say, talking to the trees. I read healing books, and I just took time out of life. I missed my children deeply, and I tried to go back to the very town that flooded me with so much painful childhood trauma. It almost unraveled the little bit of healing I had accomplished. I knew I had to move on and continue my road to wellness. I settled in the Okanagan, registered my youngest in school, and we started from scratch. I was not communicating with my biological mother at that time, and I was just trying to get rid of the past and go forward. However, when I would see families celebrating family time on celebrated holidays, my heart ached for me and my sons. I soon met my partner of today, and we purchased a home. I seemed to progress well in my healing journey and adapted to his family on celebrated holidays. That seemed to fill the void for a while. However, I started to get on that roller coaster again, and I needed a permanent change. After my kids were graduated from school, I went back to school at 48 years old, and I went to college. But before I did, I requested my child welfare files from the Freedom of Information. Putting my life's pieces back together, my final step towards my truth-seeking journey. On August 9th, 2014, I wrote to the Vital Statistics Agency Confidential Services of the provincial government in Victoria, BC, to request an application for service for my original birth certificate as Shelley Ann Bush. The release of all or any information pertaining to me and my adoption, including a copy of the adoption order. And I also requested access to my child welfare files while I was a ward of the Superintendent of Child Protection Services as my legal guardian. Along with my letter of request, I completed the application for service pertaining to an adopted person or birth parent. I soon was informed that because I was born in Ontario, I would have to obtain my information from Ontario. I was also informed that I would not receive my original birth certificate. However, I would receive my live birth certificate or birth document. On September 10th, 2014, I mailed my completed form to the Service Ontario office of the Registrar General. My application for post-adoption birth information under sections 48.1 and 48.2 of the Vital Statistics Act. Again, I requested all information regarding my birth registration and release of my records under the Adoption Act that is in compliance with the Vital Statistics Act of Ontario. Also, on September 10th, 2014, I obtained a form called Authorization for Release of Records, held by the Ministry of Children and Family Development, the Ministry of British Columbia, pursuant to sections 22.4 or sections 33.1 1 and B of the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. I proceeded to request and authorize the ministry to disclose records relating to me with my requested relevant date ranges. So I asked from 1966 to 1977. I signed my signature as a ministry client. I knew because of my name change, I would have to dig deeper, and it was a lot of extra paperwork. I sent my application request form called Authorization for Release of Records. And I sent that in an email and in an attachment to the address of the Freedom of Information. In my email, I explained my name change and asked them for all things relevant to me while I was in their care as my legal guardian. On September 16th, 2014, I received a response to my request for access to records of my September 10th, 2014, and it was from the Personal Access Team of the province of British Columbia, advising me that they will make every effort to respond to my request by October 23rd, 2014. They also informed me that when my records are ready, they would be sent to the nearest ministry office, and I would have to bring 2 pieces of ID and go through their protocol to pick up my records. Also, on September 16th, 2014, I received a response from the Services of Ontario Logistics Services Branch with notice that they are going to provide me with an uncertified copy of the original registration and an uncertified copy of any registered adoption order. Could you please switch the... Yes, thank you. This was the first time I saw or knew anything about me at the time of my birth. Yep, there I am. That's what I got. There it was, what I weighed at birth, my birth mother's handwriting of my given name, Shelley Ann Bush, the time I was born, the address where we lived, which was at my great-grandmother Boucher's in Toronto, Ontario. And there it was, the validation of who I was. This wasn't a bad dream. Here's the facts. And I was thirsty for more. Also included was my request for access to records and a copy of my adoption order. It is now October 20th, 2014. I received another letter from the Personal Access Team of British Columbia regarding my application for my request for access to my records. They were advising me that the original date given was now going to be prolonged again. Long story short, like I said, there it is. December 11th, 2014, from the Information and Privacy Analyst Personal Access Service Team, informing me that my records have been provided by the Ministry of Children and Families Development. Further, they informed me that some of the information has been and would be withheld pursuant to Section 22, meaning disclosure harmful to personal privacy of the Freedom of Information and Privacy Act. To my dismay, some of the documents that British Columbia had blacked out, and they did, they blacked out what they felt was relevant, I guess, under Section 22, was some of the exact same documents that I received from Ontario files, and nothing was blacked out. And so my journey continues. Putting the pieces back together, reading my child welfare files, all 300 plus pages. I did not read all of my huge pile of papers of my child welfare files because of the first, there was absolutely nothing that had any sort of organization to it at all. It was just this plumped thing of paper. So when I started reading what was on the top, it kind of contradicted what my mother had told me, and it broke my heart. So I just put them down, and I can't do this anymore. So there they sat in my office in a box on the floor. And I kind of believe, now that I've got the forms together, that those papers were kind of strategically put that way. I could be wrong, but that's how I felt. I shut down. I put the files down, and I decided to stop this truth-seeking journey. So my child welfare files sat in the box on the floor in my office for over a year, and I went to college. Again, I was on a roller coaster and kept very little contact with my mother. I finished my year in college and now was back at home looking for a job. While back in my office, I looked at this box on the floor that I had worked so hard to get, and now I am terrified and fear the truth. I had been broken for so long that I think I was almost afraid to completely heal. I knew that I had to read those files to help me on my journey of self-discovery. I was so afraid of what I did not know. So I decided to get all the papers into a book form, as you see there, and then I would read them. The papers were presented to me in no format, so it was impossible to figure out the chain and the order of how things had transpired. So I did a lot of photocopying to enable me to put the papers in numbered sequences. That took me a long time, and I was pleased with my accomplishment. I wrapped each page in a page sheet protector, and I put them in a binder. Finally came to the day to sit down with a nice glass of wine and a warm blanket and start the read about me. This proved to be just as confusing when I first received them. Frustrated, again, I put it away. I started a new job and made that my excuse to neglect my truth-seeking journey. Despite my best efforts to avoid my child welfare files, wham! Life had another plan for me. I had an unexpected surgery and a whole lot of time on my hands. So I had no more excuses. It was time to get back to that book. Life just threw me a time-consuming curve. Time to finish my truth-seeking journey. So I began to look through the binder that I had previously put together and started to read some of the pages, and soon realized that I needed to put this book in the sequence of the date of each page, not the number. This took so much more time to get this format completed, like putting a puzzle together. Finally, I was able to sit down with that glass of wine and start to read the story of me. As I read through my files, I saw the many letters that my mother had previously shown me, and the documentation taken by the child welfare agencies proving the reason we were put into child protection custody was because of child battery towards me and my mother. I also read the well-documented notes from the child welfare agencies of how crucial it was for them to remove my sister and I from the first foster home. And I quote, "The foster mother was unable to love Shelley." That was me. I suffered greatly at the hands of that woman. I read comments from the Children's Aid Society about my mother, and I quote, "She gives an impression of a rather tough young girl, an independent young girl who has had to fend for herself for quite some time. I saw reports showing that I was sick as an infant with a high fever, as a very young girl, and my mother taking me to the Toronto hospital and afraid to sign any consent to enable the hospital to treat me because she felt anything she signed, they would take me away. And I quote, "She seems to have strong feelings for her daughter, Shelley Ann, but does not realize by not signing the implications of her actions." That's how afraid my mom was that they were going to take me, because they were on her from the minute I was born. I was able to read the desperate acts of my mother, trying so hard to keep me. In 1972, a memorandum is noted, and I quote, "I hope you are right in your evaluation of this situation, but I'm quite concerned. In December, you reported that there were problems with the foster mother." And again, she was unable to love Shelley, signed by a social worker. Yet, I remained in that home for 5 years. It is now 1973, and although my mother still continued to write letters to the Children's Aid and updating them constantly with her address and informing them of her very capable position and asking if she could have her girls back, they continued to deny her of her daughters, and I continued to be subjected to serious abuses in both foster homes. And the Children's Aid continued to make another placement plan for my sister and I, not giving us back. I was able to see the strategic planning of the Children's Aid and how they gave us to strangers and wrote reports I knew to be untrue. It was not until 1976 when we would be legally adopted. I'm now 10 years old. I was able to see how the intergovernmental departments colluded in agreement to keep us from being returned to our mother. On June 4th, 1973, Adoption Placement Section Memorandum, and I quote, "We are at a loss to know what kind of home which would be a good permanent resource for these children. For these children, if we were not provided with any information on the children." Are you kidding me? It's 1973. We've been in care since 1968, and they have no information on us? Yet, we were wards of the Child Welfare Superintendent since 1968. So these are some of the things that I found in my files. And I am here to tell you, it was my mother I needed, not strangers. As I read through my files, I made many, many calls to my mother, and we were able to piece together all the long-awaited answers and how things came to be and how things ended up so dysfunctional. Now I could build my relationship with her on a whole new level, and how I wished we could have started over. The gift of my extensive files completed me 100%, allowing me to trust and get on with my healing journey. Soon after, I had my sister apply for her files, and I opted to let her do hers as she saw fit. I wanted to see if she would receive extensive files like mine. Sadly, when she received her files, it wasn't even a fraction of what my files were, and not one of my mother's letters that she continued to write for almost 15 years. Not one was in her files. Shortly after I had put my child welfare files together, I received an email about Alex Gervais, a young Métis British Columbia boy who had been in foster care of the very same system that I grew up in, whose life ended way too soon. This flooded my memory of all the hardships and times I felt I wanted to end things too. I had my story to tell. I saw Jason Simmons' phone number at the bottom of the email, and I made a call to him. I didn't know Jason, never met him in my life. And I said, I have a story to say, and I have a story to share. I expressed my concerns that the system is still letting down our children, and I'd like to share my story. Soon after, I had a coffee with Jason, and I came walking in with this big book. And I briefed him on my experiences as a Métis child growing up in the foster care system. Shortly after that, I realized that I needed to condense these files because nobody's going to be able to go through all that. So I spent another month in my office condensing and condensing and condensing. So I managed to do 36 pages out of that, out of all the things that I felt were pertinent highlights. So while I've been listening to others' experiences of the 60 Scoop's traumas, I also learned the devastation it has plagued on my family from earlier generations. Could you just flip that one more time, please? Thank you. So I'm going to just go back a little bit into the generation of the Boucher family. So now it's 1955 or so. And my mother was playing with her brother and cousins at my great-grandma Boucher's home, which was my first home in Toronto. And right before her eyes, she saw her Aunt June come running into the house screaming, "Hide the children, hide the children." And because of the circumstances of her marriage breakdown, Children's Aid figured that they had the rights to her children. Those children were scooped from my great-grandmother Boucher's home, and they were never seen again by their mother. My very first home, they were still scooping. It was 1962, and my mother and her brother were placed in residential schools, native residential schools, and they were abused terribly. So it just is a continuous cycle. And again, 1966, I'm born in Toronto. And my very first home was at my great-grandma Boucher's, the very home my second cousins were scooped from. I share with you how government involvement in our family life has gone back so many generations. I have met some fantastic people on this journey, such as Métis 60 Scoop survivor Dwayne Morris-Obeck, and others. They inspire me to continue my work, and I know I'm not alone. I thank my mother for being here today. Mom? And for not giving up on me when I was on that roller coaster road ride. I thank my son for being here today and showing your continued support, because I know it wasn't easy. Thank you. I no longer am nobody's girl. I know who I am, and I choose to make a difference. Before I finish, I would like to see, as part of the 60 Scoop reconciliation, that the government gives each adoptee access to their child welfare files, and give each adoptee their original birth certificates. This should be a service done by their personal access team. Yep. This is such an important part of the validation and the healing. If anybody can tell you, that's me. Thank you for listening to my truth-seeking journey and validation. Before I go, I have a wonderful book here done by Dr. Jacqueline Maurice, sitting with us today. And I'm just going to read just a very quick little phrase that she put, that she signed in my book, and I can't wait to read it. So she says, "Thank you. Thank you for your strong and strengthening spirit for yourself, your family, and for our Métis Nation. My Creator continue to grant you courage, wisdom,